They trusted her with the future of the monarchy. They gave her power, presence, and silence. But this royal guard heard something he was never meant to, behind a closed door, on a secured line. He heard Camilla hiring a contract killer. He heard her call the king an anchor, a problem to be removed. And worse, he heard her plan to strike during a live address with Charles standing at the podium and a weapon waiting underneath it. He could have reported it. He could have buried it. But instead, he stopped it. And when the world asked who saved the crown that day, he didn't say a word until now. Before I show you how a single royal guard risked everything to reveal Camilla's darkest secret and what happened the moment the king found out. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, because what you're about to see wasn't rumour, it wasn't drama, it was almost regicide. The autumn air hung thick with London fog as Sergeant Nathan Ward adjusted his white gloves outside Lancaster House. The pale yellow facade was lit like a movie set against the darkening sky, but something felt wrong from the moment he'd stepped out of the transport van. This wasn't his usual assignment. Nathan was forecourt duty, ceremonial guard work at Windsor, the kind where tourists took photos and children waved. But tonight, he'd been pulled for internal security at what the briefing called a cultural diplomacy reception. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before the dress uniform. He knew when details didn't add up. For starters, the guest list had bypassed Home Office protocol entirely. Several security clearances were marked pending, unusual for an event hosting foreign dignitaries. When Nathan had mentioned it during briefing, a logistics officer barely looked up from her clipboard. Lady Camilla requested some discretion, just a formality. Then there were the catering cases. Nathan had watched 3 large containers, unmarked, padlocked, rolled through the back courtyard with no inspection. The handler signed them off with one of Camilla's personal aides. No dogs, no verification, no questions. The final red flag was the staff. Half the regular stewards had been replaced last minute by a group listed as external hospitality consultants. Their lanyards were black instead of the usual blue. Their accents weren't British. South African, maybe Australian. Hard to place. Nathan didn't voice his concerns. Guards don't speculate. But his eyes logged everything, the same way they had during night patrols outside Kandahar when the silence felt too perfect. Inside Lancaster House, the reception was already humming with quiet power. Politicians in tailored suits clustered near the windows. Foreign dignitaries sipped champagne beside oil paintings worth more than most people's houses. Camilla moved through the crowd like she owned it, which Nathan supposed she did. He'd been positioned at the east corridor, watching the flow between the main ballroom and the private lounges. His radio crackled occasionally with routine chatter, a delegate refusing to surrender his phone, a baroness requesting different seating, a waiter asking about dietary restrictions, normal noise. But Nathan's instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive when IEDs were buried in road dust, kept whispering that something was off. Not obvious, subtle. The kind of wrong that lived in timing and positioning. As a precaution, he activated his body mic. Standard protocol, rarely needed for ceremonial duties. Tonight felt different. He was rotating between his post and the back stairwell when he noticed the drawn curtain in the private library, a section that was supposed to be empty. Through the fabric he caught a voice that made his spine straighten. Camilla, sharp and controlled, but she wasn't supposed to be in that room. Nathan moved closer, boots silent on marble, hand instinctively resting near his ceremonial sword, not drawn, just ready. What he heard next changed everything. Nathan positioned himself just shy of the curtain, close enough to catch the conversation without pressing his ear to the door like some palace gossip. The voices inside were clear, direct, operational. Camilla's tone was unmistakable, not the practiced warmth she used for public appearances, but something colder, more focused. The timing has to be perfect, no deviation. Do you understand? A pause. Then a male voice Nathan didn't recognize. Clipped accent, definitely not British. American or maybe South African. professional in the way contractors spoke when discussing wet work. As long as your team holds the doors for exactly 90 seconds, it's done. After that, I'm a ghost. Nathan felt ice form in his chest. This wasn't diplomatic small talk. This was operational language, the kind used by men who killed for money. Camilla again, lower now, but every word cutting through the silence. I want it clean. No spectacle. He collapses. Medics rush in. We move forward with transition protocols. No scandal, just grief. The words hit Nathan like a physical blow. She was talking about King Charles, her husband, and she was discussing his murder with the clinical detachment of someone ordering catering. Another pause. The contractor's voice again. You'll receive confirmation at 6 a.m. No names after that. No contact. Payment clears on delivery. Nathan's training kicked in. He adjusted his sleeve to ensure the body mic caught every word while keeping his breathing steady and silent. The recording wouldn't be admissible in court. Too much ambient noise. No visual confirmation. But it would be enough to raise the right questions. Camilla's final words made his hands clench. I want this behind us, before his address tomorrow morning. Charles is dragging the monarchy backwards with his sentimentality. I won't let him take the rest of us down with him. Footsteps, the rustle of expensive fabric, a phone being placed on a table. Nathan stepped back just as the door handle turned. A woman in a grey suit emerged. Not palace staff, no one he recognized from security briefings. She glanced at him just long enough to register uniform and rank, then walked toward the east corridor with the purposeful calm of someone who belonged but shouldn't. Nathan didn't follow. He maintained his post, letting her disappear into the crowd. But inside his chest, something cold and sharp had settled. This wasn't theoretical anymore. Somewhere in Lancaster House, a professional killer was preparing to murder the King of England, and the order had come from the Queen Consort herself. He had less than 12 hours to stop it. Nathan's first move wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. He needed intelligence, and intelligence lived in paperwork. The internal security roster was kept in a white binder near the staff annex, usually ignored by everyone except junior operations officers. Nathan had no business looking at it, but tonight, usual rules didn't apply. With a casual glance over his shoulder, he opened the binder and flipped to the third-party credentials section. His finger traced down column after column of names, clearance levels, and authorization codes until he found what made his blood run cold. J. Garrett, external audio consultant, clearance green, origin private subcontractor, discretionary office. Discretionary office, palace code for Camilla's personal team. Nathan had heard the name Garrett before. Back in Helmand, during a base rotation in 2018, there had been a briefing about private military contractors operating in the region. Garrett had been flagged. Ex-Rhodesian recon, vanished from official records after 2009, the kind of operative who specialized in executive interventions for clients who paid in cryptocurrency. And now he was here, with full access to Lancaster House, authorized by Camilla herself. Nathan turned to the venue layout. Lancaster House ballroom, podium placement sightlines, media positions. Garrett was scheduled for 2 equipment inspections, 1 hour before doors opened, and again 15 minutes prior to the King's speech. Perfect timing, perfect cover, perfect kill zone. The King would be elevated, lit, framed by cameras. A single suppressed shot would disappear under applause and be lost in the chaos that followed. By the time security realized what happened, Garrett would be gone. Nathan closed the binder and returned it to its place. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, but he moved like a man without a care in the world. If someone was watching, and he was certain someone was, they'd see nothing but a bored guard going through the motions. The question now wasn't whether he should act. It was how to act without getting himself killed, or worse, letting Camilla know her plan had been compromised. He needed proof, hard evidence, something more than overheard conversations and suspicious schedules, which meant finding the people who worked behind the scenes, the ones who saw everything because everyone ignored them. Nathan made his way to the building's lower level, where the real work happened. Down here, beneath the marble and crystal, Lancaster House revealed its working bones, utility corridors, equipment rooms, and the maze of passages that kept events running smoothly. He found her in the ballroom's understage area, crouched beneath the podium structure with a headlamp clipped to her cap. She was soldering cables that fed into the main audio array, completely absorbed in her work. "Don't jump," Nathan said quietly. She startled anyway, bonking her head against a steel support beam. "Jesus, sorry, I didn't hear you coming." "My fault. You're Megan Carter." Her eyes narrowed. "How do you know my name?" Nathan crouched beside her, voice low. "Because your name was almost removed from tonight's roster. Camilla's office submitted a revision request this morning. You were the tech they wanted gone." Megan sat back on her heels, confusion creasing her forehead. "I wasn't told about any changes." "That's why I wanted to talk to you," Nathan said. "Have you seen anything unusual today? Equipment that wasn't logged? Access requests from people you didn't recognize?" She hesitated, then reached into a nearby supply crate and pulled out a small black carrying case. A brass-embossed sticker marked it with Camilla's personal crest. "This was sitting by the main podium junction when I arrived this morning," she said. "No requisition form. No work order. It wasn't here during yesterday's prep." Nathan opened the case carefully. Inside, a high-frequency transmitter node, a compact motion sensor, and what looked like a weighted shell casing, except it was hollow and precisely machined. Not audio equipment, weapon components. "There's something else," Megan said, reaching into her tool belt. She handed him a green keycard. "One of Camilla's aides told me to dispose of this quietly. Said it was an extra security override that wasn't needed anymore." Nathan held the card to the overhead light. Level 4 clearance, enough to bypass lockdown protocols during a royal event. The kind of access that would let someone move freely even when security was heightened. "It opens the east side technical access," Megan continued, "leads directly to the podium's interior crawl space." But she wasn't finished. Her voice dropped lower, nervous energy making her words tumble faster. "There's been other weird stuff too. Yesterday I caught someone in the equipment room who wasn't on the manifest. Tall guy, foreign accent, said he was double-checking acoustics, but he was measuring sight lines, not sound patterns. And this morning, 2 of our regular AV crew called in sick at the last minute. Both of them. That never happens." She pulled out her phone and showed Nathan a photo, blurry, taken from across the room, but clear enough to show a man crouched near the podium base. Same build as the voice Nathan had heard through the curtain. "I took this when I thought he wasn't looking," she whispered. "Something about him felt wrong. Military, maybe, but not our military." Nathan stared at the image, pieces clicking into place faster now. This wasn't just about removing Megan from tonight's roster. It was about replacing experienced palace staff with people who wouldn't ask the right questions. "You may have just saved the king's life," Nathan told her. Megan shook her head. "I don't want to be involved in whatever this is." "You already are," Nathan replied, "and now so am I." The understage corridor felt like the belly of a ship. Narrow, cramped, filled with the hum of machinery and the smell of electrical components. Nathan moved slowly, every sense alert. The ballroom above was quiet now, most of the equipment tests finished for the night. But someone had been here recently. The podium's access panel was ajar, not obviously, just enough for someone who knew what to look for. Nathan had seen similar staging in Afghanistan, tiny details designed to look accidental while providing easy access for follow-up operations. He approached carefully, ceremonial sword loose in its sheath, but ready. Inside the podium's cavity, among the usual tangle of wires and connections, sat a matte black device, unlike anything used for audio or lighting. A flexible mounting arm had been bolted to the underside of the king's lectern, its grip shaped to hold something specific, something that looked exactly like a compact pistol. Nathan photographed everything with his wrist cam, then reached for the device. As his fingers brushed the casing, he noticed something else, a small paper tag tucked behind the mounting bracket. He pulled it free carefully. It wasn't palace inventory, it was a receipt, handwritten in blue ink. Final positioning confirmed. Extraction point. Service exit T. Vehicle ready, 11:47 a.m. 11:47, 3 minutes after the king's speech was scheduled to begin. Nathan pocketed the receipt and reached for the device again. His fingers had just touched the casing when a voice behind him made his blood freeze. "You're not supposed to be here." Nathan spun, but the man was already moving. Garrett had to be, drove a shoulder into Nathan's spine, slamming him chest first against the metal framework. The impact drove air from his lungs and sent sparks of pain through his ribs. Garrett moved like a professional, no wasted motion, no hesitation. One arm snaked around Nathan's throat in a chokehold, while the other pinned his sword arm. Years of combat experience showed in every movement. "Tell me who sent you," Garrett growled, tightening the hold. Nathan didn't waste breath on answers. He kicked backward, shifting his weight to collapse both of them into the wiring rack. Metal groaned, and cables sparked as they hit the ground hard. The fall loosened Garrett's grip, just enough for Nathan to drive his elbow into the man's ribs. He felt something give, not breaking, but definitely bruising. Garrett's hand went for his hip. Nathan saw the movement and reacted on instinct, yanking his ceremonial bayonet from its sheath, not to kill, but to parry. The blade caught Garrett's wrist, and Nathan twisted, using leverage to force the gun away. The snap of knuckles echoed off the metal walls. Garrett cursed in what sounded like Afrikaans, his weapon clattering into the shadows. Both men scrambled for advantage. Nathan grabbed the pistol mount from under the lectern and used it like a club, catching Garrett's temple with the hard edge. Not enough to kill. Nathan wasn't an executioner, but enough to drop him. The corridor fell silent, except for Nathan's ragged breathing. Garrett lay unconscious, a trickle of blood running from his scalp. Nathan zip-tied him with maintenance wire, then activated the silent alert protocol, a 3-second hold on his ceremonial badge that would ping Royal Guard dispatch without broadcasting to wider palace communications. He'd learned not to trust the usual channels. Looking down at the unconscious assassin, Nathan felt the weight of what he'd prevented. In less than 9 hours, King Charles would take that podium. Without intervention, he would have walked directly into Garrett's crosshairs. But stopping the killer was only half the job. Now he had to prove who'd hired him. Dawn came grey and cold, the kind of London morning that made brass buttons sting through wool and turned breath to vapour in the crisp air. Nathan had managed 3 hours of sleep in the barracks, but his body still ached from the fight with Garrett. A purple bruise spread across his ribs, and a thin bandage covered the cut on his neck where the assassin's fingernail had caught him. None of it showed beneath his immaculate red tunic. Lancaster House buzzed with controlled chaos. Media vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward a grey sky. Palace officials herded dignitaries through security checkpoints with practiced efficiency. The royal standard climbed slowly up the flagpole, announcing the king's impending arrival. Nathan had requested reassignment. Officially, he was now covering the service entrance, a post so minor it was usually given to probationary guards. But the corridor it connected to led straight to the understage area where Garrett had planned his attack, where Nathan would be waiting. At 10:42 a.m., King Charles arrived in the state Bentley, its Rolls-Royce grille gleaming despite the overcast sky. He moved with the measured pace of a man who had spent decades in the public eye, greeting the Defence Secretary with a firm handshake, nodding to the Chancellor, offering a brief smile to a Commonwealth delegate. The crowd applauded as he entered the ballroom, but Nathan's attention was locked on the service corridor. A rolling cart marked Tech Support, Audio Reserves, was approaching the rear access door. One man pushing it, average height, black polo shirt, lanyard flipped to hide the ID photo, baseball cap pulled low over his face. The build matched Garrett's, but the limp was gone. So was the beard Nathan had seen in the understage fight. Professional, adaptable, exactly what Nathan expected from a high-end contractor. The man wheeled his cart toward the checkpoint without breaking stride, confident in whatever credentials he was carrying. Nathan stepped into the corridor just as the cart reached the door. "Hold there," Nathan said, voice calm but carrying the authority of the uniform. The man didn't stop. If anything, he moved faster. Nathan crossed the space in 4 quick strides, drew his sword, not ceremonial now, deadly serious, and slammed the pommel against the cart's edge. The lid flew open. Inside wasn't audio equipment. Inside was a compact weapon, mounted on a precision gimbal, designed to snap into the under-podium mount in seconds and deliver a single silent shot to the podium above. The man lunged, going for Nathan's throat with professional efficiency. Nathan met him with his shoulder, driving him into the corridor wall hard enough to crack plaster. The cart overturned, spilling the weapon across the floor. The assassin clawed for a sidearm, but Nathan was faster. Elbow to the solar plexus, knee to the thigh, open palm to the throat, not to kill, just to end the fight quickly. The man dropped, gasping. Then came the scream from the ballroom. Someone had heard the commotion. Within seconds, 2 Royal Protection officers rounded the corner, hands on their holsters, ready for anything. Nathan immediately raised both arms, fingers spread wide, voice steady and clear. Royal Guard ward, contractor is armed, weapon confirmed, attempted breach of royal proximity. The killer tried one last desperate move. The RPOs levelled him before he could clear his holster. Handcuffs, radios crackling, shouted commands. But on the stage above, King Charles hadn't flinched. He looked toward the corridor, not in fear, but with the calm recognition of a man who had survived decades of threats and knew when his guards were doing their job. Nathan finally allowed himself to breathe. He'd stopped the bullet. Now came the harder part, proving who had loaded the gun. The ballroom erupted into controlled chaos as Royal Protection officers escorted the would-be assassin out in handcuffs. Journalists pushed against the velvet ropes, cameras clicking frantically. Dignitaries whispered urgent questions to each other, while staffers spoke into earpieces with pale, tense faces. Through it all, King Charles never left the stage. He stepped back from the podium briefly, consulted with his private secretary, then gave a subtle nod that spoke of decades handling crises with quiet dignity. "Ladies and gentlemen," the secretary announced to the crowd, "there's been a brief security matter. Please remain seated. His Majesty will resume shortly." Behind the velvet curtain, Sergeant Nathan Ward stood at attention in a private antechamber, the assassin's weapon laid out on a white linen table like evidence in a court-martial. Beside it sat the confiscated phone from Garrett's equipment belt, now unlocked by Palace Cybersecurity. The lead MOD liaison scrolled through the device's encrypted messages, his face growing darker with each revelation. "Messages from a number listed only as E," he reported. "Phrases like event confirmed and ensure fallback access via Carter override match the intelligence Sergeant Ward provided. But this message," he paused, reading from the screen, "sent 36 hours ago. No contact after completion. Discretion payment to be routed via C's Trust." Nathan felt something cold settle in his stomach. Not surprise. He'd known this moment was coming since he'd heard Camilla's voice through that curtain, but knowing and proving were different things. The liaison looked up. The payment routing traces back to a Treasury-linked account used exclusively by the discretionary office. Camilla's office. Her fingerprints were all over the assassination attempt. The liaison keyed his radio. "Confirming evidence package Alpha. Prepare internal containment protocols. Advise House Command. Immediate administrative separation of discretionary staff. Prep the adjacent chamber." Within minutes, Camilla's closest aides were being quietly detained, phones confiscated, laptops secured, access cards suspended. The machinery of Palace security moved with surgical precision, sealing off potential leaks and securing evidence. Nathan watched it unfold with grim satisfaction. These weren't the obvious theatrics of a public arrest. This was institutional power protecting itself with quiet, devastating efficiency. The MOD liaison nodded toward Nathan. "You're needed in the private conference room." Together they walked down a corridor lined with portraits of long-dead monarchs, each one a reminder of the continuity Nathan had helped preserve. The conference room door bore no nameplate, no indication of what happened behind its oak panels. Inside, King Charles waited. So did Camilla. She stood behind a burgundy leather chair, coat half-buttoned, as if she'd been interrupted while leaving. When she saw Nathan enter, her eyes widened slightly, just enough to show recognition, but not enough for denial. The evidence lay spread across the mahogany table. The weapon, the mount, the phone with its damning message trail. Everything that connected a hired killer to the highest levels of the royal household. King Charles regarded the display with the same calm he'd shown on the podium. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. "This is all confirmed?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Nathan replied. Charles turned to Camilla with the slow, deliberate movement of a man choosing his words carefully. "I trusted you with this household." Camilla's chin lifted defiantly. "I did what was necessary for the future of the crown." "No," Charles said, each word precise and final. "You did what was unforgivable." The silence that followed stretched taut as a wire. Nathan remained perfectly still, but he could feel the weight of history pressing down on the room. This wasn't just about an assassination attempt. It was about the soul of an institution that had survived wars, scandals, and centuries of political upheaval. Camilla broke the silence, her voice carrying a desperate edge. "Charles, you don't understand what this monarchy is becoming. You think it can survive on sentiment and tradition, but the world doesn't wait for hesitation. It doesn't wait for weakness." "So your solution was murder?" Charles asked, still not raising his voice. "I gave you chances," she said, words tumbling faster now. "Months of chances. You kept delaying reforms, postponing necessary decisions. You wanted to bring Anne back into succession discussions. You started treating Charlotte like some kind of symbol instead of recognizing political reality." The king's expression didn't change, but Nathan caught the slight tightening around his eyes. These weren't abstract political disagreements. They were family betrayals, dressed up as policy disputes. "The Commonwealth ministers were losing faith," Camilla continued, her composure cracking. "The Australian Parliament was discussing alternatives. Canada was questioning the relevance of the Crown. I was managing a constitutional crisis, while you held tea parties with children's charities." "So you decided the solution was to make me a martyr?" Charles asked, each word measured and cold. "I decided the solution was transition before collapse," she snapped. "William understands modern monarchy. He knows how to work with governments instead of lecturing them about duty and service." Nathan found himself speaking before he could stop the words. "So you decided to put a gun under his podium?" Camilla whirled on him, eyes blazing. "I did what had to be done to protect the future of the crown from," she gestured toward Charles, "from sentimental paralysis." Charles raised his hand, not to silence her, but to reclaim control of the room. "I swore an oath," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades, "not to efficiency, not to popularity polls, not to your vision of political necessity. I swore to serve the people who place their trust in that crown." He turned to face her fully, and Nathan saw something shift in the king's expression. Not anger, but a profound sadness. "You violated that oath. Not just mine, your own." Camilla's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I kept this place functioning while you grieved for your mother." Charles nodded once. "And now you'll step away while I repair what you've broken." He turned to the MOD liaison. "Effective immediately. Suspend all operations of the discretionary office. Seal the records. Any household staff connected to these communications are to be placed under administrative review pending full investigation." Camilla moved as if to protest, but Charles didn't give her the space. "You are suspended from any official household capacity until this matter reaches its conclusion. You'll remain at Highgrove under house supervision. Then, to Nathan, you'll be placed under temporary royal protection detail. You're not to leave Windsor grounds without escort until we're certain there are no additional threats." "Yes, sir." Charles stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost personal. "You saved my life today, Sergeant Ward. More than that, you may have saved the crown from something far worse than an assassin's bullet." Nathan offered the slightest nod. In this room, with its weight of consequence, a salute would have felt wrong somehow. From the corner, palace staff entered with sealed evidence containers and legal documents. The machinery of justice was already turning, quiet and inexorable. The woman who had once stood beside the throne was now being escorted toward a side exit, Not in public disgrace, but in the kind of contained fall from grace that the monarchy had perfected over centuries. As the door closed behind her, Nathan found himself alone with the king for just a moment. "Your Majesty," Nathan said quietly, "was there anything else I should have seen? Any other threats?" Charles looked at him with something that might have been pride. "You saw everything that mattered, Sergeant." Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who convince themselves they're protecting the same thing you are, just in a different way. The king paused at the door. "My mother would have been proud of you." Then he was gone, leaving Nathan alone with the evidence of a conspiracy that had come within minutes of succeeding. Outside, London continued its daily rhythm, unaware of how close it had come to losing a king. Should a royal guard risk everything to save the crown from the inside? Was King Charles right to handle Camilla's betrayal quietly, or should justice have been more public? And what would you have done if you overheard a murder plot in the corridors of power? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. If you believe some oaths are worth breaking every rule to keep, hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. We upload stories like this every single day. And if you know someone who thinks royal guards are just for show, send them this video. Watch our other stories now appearing on your screen. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story you won't believe is true. Until then, stay sharp.